Hello there and welcome. I'm Ole Brygger, and if you're new here, I really hope I'll earn your subscription today. Today I'm going to expand the temple. Yes, I know in the beginning I said there would be 3 episodes. This is the 4th, and there will probably be a 5th. I am going to build some middle sections between the 3 major buildings I already built. The first one will be pretty simple. It will be between the prayer hall and the library and just a couple of entrances in the sides. The second one will also be a separator between the library and the observatory. But there will be 2 side buildings, one with a laboratory and another one for a healing recreation area. There is still a lot of things to do, so we better get started. First, I will need to build 6 base plates, 2 hallways, 2 entrances, and 2 rooms. The first parts I will make is the hallways. They will be 10 inches by 3 inches plus 10 millimeters in each sides for the walls and doors. The first hallway will be in 3 layers, so it will be elevated to fit the doors on the prayer hall and the library. I accidentally cut something wrong when I was laying out the grid with my X-Acto knife, but I found out that this green putty might work to cover up my mistakes. I used a wet brush to smooth things out, and when it's dry I can just sand it down. At least I hope I can. The base plates for the entrances will be 5 by 5 inches. I'll also need to build some stairs for this and some columns to hold the roof. For the stairs, I will use my Proxxon circular cutter. This is a tool from Shifting Lands, and I will leave a link in the description below because they make some awesome tools for the Proxxon. And this is what I need for my stairs, so they will match the entrance in front of the temple. Let's see if we can sand the green putty. I think this will work, and you won't be able to see the wrong cuts I made after it's been painted. To make the pillars, I will cut out a piece of foam, actually a lot of pieces of foam. They are 2.5 inch by 1/2 inch and 1/2 inch. And I will use another template from Shifting Lands to cut out the pillars. And 8 of those is now done. Now I just need to do a little cleaning. The columns were not quite tall enough, so I will cut out a tiny piece of foam and put in the bottom of each pillar. I used some Arlene's tacky glue to attach all the elements for the entrances. The first hallway and the 2 entrances are almost done. I will just need the final walls in each end that will hold the doors, but I will make them later. The second hallway is a bit easier to make. I'll just need 1 piece of foam and lay out the grid, which is still the 10 by 3 inches, and some room for the wall. The 2 smaller rooms at the sides of the temple will be 10 by 5 inches, plus some room for the wall. The walls will be made out of the blue foam, where I will carve in all the bricks. I could have gone with individual bricks, but this is a lot faster, and since they don't need to be roughened up, it should be a pretty temple with no weathering and stuff like that on the walls. I will just carve them out of this blue foam. I also need a couple of doors on the end of both of the side buildings. I'll just cut up the existing wall and make a hole for the door frame. These doors are going to be exits or entrances from a temple garden that we will make in another episode. To connect the walls seamlessly, I will use the same technique as I did on the other walls on the temple. I will cut out every other brick on each end of the wall and do it the opposite way on the adjacent wall, and then they will interact with each other seamlessly. I'll use some hot glue to attach all the walls to the base plates. To match the height of the columns, I will put another layer of bricks on top of the walls at the entrances. and use some hot glue for that as well. On the observatory, I learned the skill how to make pyramid-shaped roofs, and I will use the same technique here on the entrances. I will use some 3mm foam core for the roofs. I will need to cut out 4 triangles, and the bottom of the triangle needs to be the same width as the base of the entrance. The base is square, and if I just made a triangle that would go to the middle of that square, it wouldn't work. I need to go a bit above that, so I will go up here, and this will be the height of my triangle. Cut it out and replicate it 3 more times. I actually need 8 of those because I need 2 roofs for the entrances. But now I have the 4 first, and I can combine them into a pyramid. On the back side of the pyramid, I will use some tape just to hold it together while I glue it. I use some hot glue along all the seams, and that actually holds everything together perfectly. And it fits on top of the pillars. For the roof on the hallways, I just cut out a piece of foam core that was a bit wider than the hallway itself, cut out a triangle in each end, and scorched it down through the middle of the roof, and then I could just bend it into the right shape. And then I could just use the same procedure, some tape and hot glue to put everything together. And I did everything all over again, just a bit bigger for both of the side buildings. I had plenty of my roof shingles from the previous builds that I had enough for all these roofs. I used some Arlene's tacky glue to attach all the roof tiles, and first I put everything on opposite sides and trimmed all the edges with a scissor. Some more roof tiles in the ends of the roof, and finalize it with an edge trim. I've cut out some pieces of cardboard that are 1 inch by 1/2 inch, and I will use those as roof bridge. And while I wait for the roof bridges and all the glue to set, I will use this AK concrete to give the stairs some texture. This is the same I did on the front of the temple. To make sure all the roof shingles are nice and secure, I will use some Mod Podge. This is the usual mix, 50-50 Mod Podge and black paint. I will use the Army Painter's Ruins and Cliff foam primer. This is from the Game Master series. This is a foam safe paint and it won't melt the foam. I had an accident. I accidentally dropped all my parts when I brought it in from my workshop, and 3 of the pillars just broke off. Luckily it was in the same spot. I decided I will break off all the rest, drill a hole and put in a toothpick just to make them stronger, because it was very thin and I thought, if I'm going to dry brush this later, it will break anyway. I used my airbrush with a light gray just to give it a brighter color before I was dry brushing it with some pan pastels. And I did the same thing on the floors in the hallways and the 2 rooms. One of the rooms is going to be a lab. And I went into Tinkercad and made this design because I have something in mind that they are doing some very weird research and experimentation in here. Tinkercad is a very easy program to use. You have some basic shapes, you can just pull them in. And it is a very basic 3D modeling tool, but it's easy to use, and for this, it worked perfectly. I also found a lot of 3D models online. I needed some beds with people for the healing halls. And of course, I needed to prime everything. There was also some lab equipment, tables, jars, and all that stuff that a lab requires. There's a lot of stuff to paint here, so I decided to prime everything in gray and give it a sinful highlight with white, since I was going to use mostly speed paints for all the painting. There's a lot of 3D models here, and all the lab equipment, beds, and my own design, I will leave a link in the description below to all the models. I also needed a couple of NPCs. This is a model I painted a while ago and I actually don't remember where I got it. But I also need to paint this wizard merchant with his cat on the shoulder. This is the part of the build I'm most excited about. I have my tanks and these 20mm tubes. I will need to cut them into size so they will match the height of the tanks. I'll also need to put something in there. I have this rotten goblin. I needed to scale down the model before I could 3D print it so he would fit in the tube. But I think this will be awesome. I also have this scaled down tadpole that will be in the tube next to the goblin. First step is to cut the tubes into size. I'll just cut it with my rotary tool with a tiny saw blade. And the 3D printed top will go right here to cover all the nasty cuts. I will cut out a small hole for the glass tubes to cover up the bottom of the tube. And this was pretty easy to do with my battery-powered hot knife. I tried some different kinds of layouts for the lab and I ended up deciding that the test tubes and tanks would go into the little room. But the problem is, my roof was not tall enough. These were a bit high, so I will need to put in some walls on the roof. I will give the base a metallic look when it's done, so I will put in some small decorations, poke a hole here and there for some rivets. I'll just give the goblin and the tadpole a quick speed paint job. I spent about half an hour just painting these up. I hit the base with some Mod Podge and some Mod Podge on a 2mm dowel. I'm gonna use this to make some pipes. I poked a hole in the bottom of the holes. That sounds weird, poking a hole in the bottom of the holes. But that's actually what I did. This is the preparation for some LED lights. Here's a couple of wheels from my caravan project, and I think they will work fine as a vowel. I just need to prime it with some black paint because they're going to have a metal look. I'll use some Talos bronze speed paint for the tanks and dry brush the base with some death metal, and the same thing goes for the walls. I also need a small pipe from the tank to the glass tube. I will only glue it onto the tank since I want the glass tube to be removable. I will glue in the tanks on the base with some super glue. Usually I don't use super glue on foam, but since this is primed with some Mod Podge and painted, it doesn't matter, the super glue won't affect the foam. And finally I will use a dark tone wash on the tanks and the lids for the glass tubes. Now I will try to make the resin pour. I will use the very smelly UV resin and tint it with a blue dye. I will need to build up the resin in layers so it won't form bubbles and heat up too much. And I will cure it with my UV light. And as you can see here, it is actually heating up a lot. There's a lot of fumes coming up from the tube. So I will need to have a respirator on because this is very, very smelly and probably toxic too. I have built up a few layers in the bottom of the glass tube, and now I can put in the goblin. I want the effect of that he's floating inside the tube. I put in a couple of drops of UV resin in the bottom of the tube and hit it with this UV laser pointer. And slowly started to build up the layers until the tank was completely topped off. Some super glue on the top lid, and he will be sealed in here forever. Or will he? I repeated the same process for the tadpole for the second tank, and I think it turned out awesome. I will need to raise the roof about 1.5 inches, and it fits exactly with the width of my ruler. I also cut out some pieces of foam for the corners so it would look like the same of the rest of the temple, and glued everything together with some hot glue. I went to my workshop and wanted to paint the roofs, and I used my phone to record this, and accidentally it was in photo mode. I didn't record me painting it, but I found this Hydra turquoise online very cheap, and it was a color match for the rest of the temple. And while it was drying up, I could start painting all the rest of the 3D prints. There is a lot of work to be done here, so I used some speed paints just to speed up the process. The roofs are now dry, and I can use this texture paint from AK Concrete. And the roof will get the same wash as I did on the previous builds. I'll use some burnt umber pan pastel on the walls and some grays and whites on the floors, stairs and pillars. I have laser cut some more doors like the ones I used in the rest of the temple. I will use some dark wood speed paint with my airbrush. I want to put some lights below the tanks, and I will first poke a hole with this little round file to mark up where the wires would go for the LEDs. I'll also need to find the right color of light. And I brought out my electronics box and tried some different colors. First I had this idea that the blue light would be looking pretty cool, but I think this clear white is the best for this project. I will put 3 LEDs through the hole, and this is to make the light more powerful. I used a tweezer to bend all the wires so the LEDs will point upwards, just to get the full effect. I'll use my hot knife to carve a path for all the wires. And they were exactly long enough to reach the second tank. Let's make a quick test, just to make sure everything works before I glue in the battery pack. I think this looks pretty cool. I carved out some room for the battery pack with my hot knife and installed it with some hot glue. The doors are now all dried up, and I will make them the same way as I did in the previous builds of this temple. I will drill a hole and put an eye hook, glue on some strips of paper as hinges, and then they are pretty much done and ready to be installed. I use some PVA glue to glue in the doors. Ah, the goblin broke out. How did that happen? I have cut one of my little plastic tubes to size, and then I will mark up some broken glass. Cut it out with my rotary 2 saw blade, breaking the part that I cut out into some smaller pieces. I prepared a piece of foam with some baking paper, and this has the same height as the rest of the stands where the tanks are. I put some super glue in the bottom of the tube and started to pour in some resin and hitting it with a UV light. I kept on putting in resin, hitting it with UV light until it made an overflow and spill out from the tube. And when I thought I had enough of the spill, I started to put in some of the shards that I have broken up. And finally I could break it off the baking paper. I have 3D printed one more of the tops for the tubes, and I will just put it in here loosely until I decide where and how I will glue it in. This project is just getting bigger and bigger, and now I expanded it with some hallways and some separate rooms, some new entrances, and in the future I just want a garden surrounding the temple. And it has to be a very beautiful garden, and they need to have somewhere where they can harvest some herbs and stuff like that. And then I have another idea that I want to expand this temple with, but I'm not quite sure how to build it yet. So I need to do some more thoughts there. But let's start having a look what's going on inside this temple. Thank you so much for watching this video to the end. I really appreciate you being here as always. And if you already haven't done it and you think I earned it, please subscribe. Stay tuned and I will be back with some more temple builds in the future. Goodbye for now.